Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to be talking, at first, we're going to be talking about security metrics, a smart approach to how you can sort of measure what really matters within a security operations center, and also walking through some of the problems and confusion you might face as you're consuming security metrics, either from your own team or from vendors who tend to post these things all over their website. I'm Brian Donohue, by the way. I am a principal security researcher here at Red Canary. So I'm going to walk through maybe the first 10 minutes or so of this webinar, talking through what I think is a pretty smart approach to metrics and some of the pitfalls you might see as you encounter them. I'm here with Owen Barnes. He is a relatively new product manager here at Red Canary. I believe this is his debut webinar. So he'll be handling the demo portion of this at the end. So without further ado, let's jump right in. If I can get the slide to advance. Hold on, my keyboard is turning on. There we go. So let's start with a bit of what the problem I see out there with metrics is. And it's kind of simple that there are, too many metrics. And within each of those metrics, you don't always have all the context you need to understand what those metrics are actually telling you, right? So on the left side of the screen here, we've got some common metrics like mean time to analyze, mean time to detect, mean time to investigate, mean time to resolution, mean time to respond, true positive rates, false negative rates. I can't even remember what CPI means. So like the number of things you might encounter can be overwhelming. And then if you kind of go out and look at the way that people talk about this, and as I said before, like you might run into these metrics internally as you're doing your own measuring, or you might see them from vendors. So on the right-hand side of the screen here, we just grabbed like a couple of examples from other websites, including our own. Like I'm not trying to dunk on other vendors or anything, but all of these metrics kind of suffer from the same problem, which is like, we don't really know necessarily what all these words mean. We don't know what the baseline is. Like, so picking on our marketing in particular, like 4x improvement in confirmed threats detected, what's the baseline, right? Like 98% of coverage against most categories of MITRE attack. Like, what does that mean? Do I really need 98% coverage of MITRE attack? Are all those things equal? So you can see this all gets a little confusing, particularly around how things get defined. So I want to spend most of my time here talking about timeliness metrics, because I think those are the ones that you're probably most likely to see. They're the ones that most security teams use as benchmarks for themselves. They're also the ones that vendors tend to like to put on their website. So let's talk about the problem with mean time to whatever. The first problem with this is the first word, mean. Like if you talk to data scientists and statisticians, they don't really use mean because averages are very susceptible to outliers. So, and by the way, if you have any questions, post them in the chat and we'll get to them as we go through here. So if you look at this, sampling of 5 different detection times, I am going to talk about mean time to detect here just because it's the simplest. Like you can see we've got 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, 18 minutes, and then 1,440 minutes, which is 24 hours. If you average all of those out, you end up with a mean time to detect of about 5 hours. Now, the problem with that is 4 out of these 5 customers, that was not their lived experience of mean time to detect, right? The median here is much better. Like as a regular customer, the regular experience that you can expect is to have a mean time to detect that's somewhere in the 15-minute range. And that's just where the problem starts here, right? We don't know what severity level we're talking about. If we're talking about relatively low level annoyances, like potentially unwanted programs and adware, like detection for those things can be really fast. As you go up to more complex, sophisticated, and evasive threats, that detection time might slow down a bit, right? So that's super important to understand, like what kind of threats are we talking about here? The other important aspect is like, when does that clock start, right? Does that start the second the threat happened? Does it start the second your tool detected the threat happening or became aware of the visibility that was required to see that threat? And more importantly, or as importantly, I guess you could say, when does the clock stop? So for detect, does it stop the second you start analyzing it? Does it stop the time at the point where you have actually confirmed the veracity of a threat? So I'm going to put a flag in the sand here and try to say, like, here's how we should define all of these things. So we start with an event, right? That's where the clock starts tipping. This is the ticking, rather. That's the moment the malicious or suspicious thing happens on an asset. It's not necessarily when your tooling becomes aware of the bad thing having happened. So some examples are like when that user downloads that malicious file, when the adversary actually logs into that identity. It's that moment that the adversary gains access to an asset. So if we're talking about median time to detect, then I think that detect is the moment you confirm the veracity of a threat. That's not when the alert fires or the information about the bad thing enters your detection pipeline. It's once you've investigated an alert or the output of a detection analytic or whatever it may be, and you have confirmed that it is malicious or suspicious and not a false positive. Now, median time to respond, I think respond should be the moment that you take action to counteract the threat. So this isn't the moment that you acknowledge the existence of a potential threat. This is after you've detected that threat and you've taken some action to stop it, like isolating an endpoint, banning a hash, or sort of otherwise starting to remove that threat from an asset. And then on the far end here is resolution. To me, resolution is the moment that the threat is entirely eradicated or you've closed that incident, right? So this is when you have re-imaged that computer or the threat is just otherwise gone. So as I said, we've focused a lot here in the opening minutes on timeliness. And that's because I think it's the one that's kind of the most confusing to wrap your head around and the one that is most dependent on definitions that are being made up within organizations, and for which there isn't really a baseline understanding of what we mean by all these different words. So I do not think timeliness is the only thing that we should be measuring, although I do think it's important. So I do think that there are kind of three categories that are a great starting point for any security operations center to start measuring the efficacy of their security program. The first here is accuracy. And accuracy is super helpful because it will help you track your efficiency and your coverage. And accuracy is really just a matter of tracking the number of false positives that are being generated by your tool set. So those are things that you're going to waste time investigating, even though they are not malicious or suspicious, and they are not going to negatively impact you other than the time you're spending investigating them. And then on the other side of that is false negatives. And this is things you miss, right? So it's really, really important to be able to track the threats that you initially miss, so that you can then tee those things up to sort of expand detection coverage, create new compensatory controls that mitigate or prevent these threats moving forward. Other than accuracy, I also like to suggest tracking volume. This can be alert volume, it can be confirmed threat detection volume, and it should definitely include the volume of incidents that you're experiencing. And this is super helpful to give you an idea of the overall health of your security posture. Like whether you want alerts to be going up or down, I would suggest that everyone wants incidents to be going down. But if your expectations or what you want is not aligning with your actual volume-based measurements, that's a good signal that you can go out, spend more money on tooling, invest more in hiring new analysts, or sort of spend time developing or improving your processes for security operations. And then the last, which we have covered already, is timeliness. And my actual suggestion for timeliness is like, yes, you should track mean time to whatever, but you should have sort of an optimal goal or sort of a benchmark that you want those metrics to come in under, right? So maybe it's an hour, right? You want to detect most of your threats in under an hour. You want to respond to most of your threats in under an hour, right? And you can move that benchmark up and down as you see fit, but having that benchmark allows you to say, all right, it's taking us too long to detect too many threats. We need to go and figure out a way to get these down, whether it's through new tools, more staff, better processes. So that's kind of my simple approach to stats. And then as my last slide here, like here are the questions that I would suggest folks should ask, whether you're a security leader who's asking these questions of your own team, or you're a prospective buyer and you want to ask these questions of vendors. So things to ask, like, do you measure median or mean time to detect, respond, or resolution? When does the clock start for each of these time-based metrics? And how do you define these things, right, in the context of security operations? What is your false positive rate? What is your false negative rate? particularly for vendors, or maybe if you've like taken over a team, getting an idea of the volume of threats that you detect and the volume of incidents that you engage in is super important. And then last but certainly not least, understanding like how often your team, or if you're a customer of a vendor, how often their customers are having to engage engage their incident response plan, or even reach out to sort of external incident response services. So that's my quick 11 minutes it turned out, or maybe it was 10 minutes on security metrics. So now I'm going to hand it over to Owen Barnes, and he's going to run you through a Red Canary detection timeline and talk you through some statistics that you can drive out of the Red Canary platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Hi, everyone. Like Brian said, my name is Owen Barnes. I am a somewhat new product manager here at Red Canary. I'm really looking forward to going through this, my debut webinar. So I hope you'll all be patient with me and give me some grace as I hopefully do a good job here. I am going to be speaking from the perspective of a Red Canary customer. Bear with me as I try and make sure that I maintain my my role here. So I'm Owen, and for this kind of demonstration, I am working in incident and response for Grand Scale Industries, and I wanted to open up here on a specific threat that was published by Red Canary for us, and kind of point out some things that I think are nice about Red Canary's kind of threat overview page. The first thing I really like is that right at the top, without having to scroll anywhere, I get a really clear kind of plain text description of what happened in this particular instance. So in this instance, it had to do with an unauthorized remote management tool that somebody had tricked one of my users into downloading and making available. One other thing that's really nice here, it's right at the top. You can see an overview of what endpoint is associated with this particular threat and what identity. And so really quickly, you get a whole bunch of context without having to kind of navigate all over the place. And if I scroll down, I actually get a timeline, this threat timeline, which is another really awesome thing I think about how Red Canary organizes information as it relates to a specific threat at Red Canary. I get a kind of chronological view based on incoming telemetry and identity information and alerts or whatever, whatever the kind of consequential information was that led to this threat being published is outlined for me really clearly in this threat timeline. And at each kind of pivotal moment in the investigation into this threat, I have these comments that were left by Red Canary experts. That give me a little bit more insight into like, what is the significance of this particular card in the threat timeline? And if I keep scrolling down the timeline, so this is kind of just the incoming data and the initial investigation. One other thing that I leverage at Red Canary is their automation. So at Red Canary, I can set up triggers that trigger based off of particular events to then take actions that trigger or sorry that kick off based off of those triggers. So in this instance, I have these playbook actions that listen for published threats and they automatically run certain playbooks. So in this instance, it was workstation containment, it banned file hashes, kind of goes on and on. And the nice thing about this is that it provides me some kind of immediate remediation for issues that might be popping up or threats that might be popping up without human intervention, and it's really instant, right as soon as Red Canary publishes the threat. And if I keep scrolling down here, another thing that I leverage at Red Canary is their active remediation product. And so active remediation is, on weekends and nights, I don't have coverage. I don't have human coverage, but that's an area where I can opt in and Red Canary can kind of provide me some additional coverage there. One thing that they do is they might clean up some artifacts related to a particular threat, but there's other kind of remediation actions that they can take right now. And whenever Red Canary does so on my behalf, they leave this really clear outline of what were the actions that they took, and they even leave a set of recommendations that kind of talk me through, what are some things that I can do to improve my security posture to help ensure that this is avoided in the future. So all of that being said, I'm sure that people want to see how we map some of what Brian was talking about to available data in the Red Canary portal. So let's imagine that I have a CISO who's saying, "Hey, I like this threat overview, and this looks great, but I really want to see kind of a bird's eye view of like how has my Red Canary implementation done, let's say over the last quarter." And so for that, we have this reports section in the portal. And the splash report, the one that I land on right when I go to the reports section, is this Red Canary detection and response by the numbers. And this is personally probably my favorite slide here at Red Canary, because what it does is it rolls up in the form of kind of this input and output funnel, all of the data that comes into Red Canary, both from me in the form of raw telemetry from Grand Scale Industries, all of my different security products, but also alerts from other security products that I leverage that also input into Red Canary. And so everything that is on the left side here with these black boxes, you can think of as kind of incoming data. And then all of the red on the right is like the human output and the real value of Red Canary, where Red Canary is filtering down through all of this kind of raw data and filtering through all the noise, and then they're just giving me the signal, right? They're just giving me what threats were identified in all of that incoming data. And which ones did we respond to? And so, at a glance, if someone just asks me, like, "Hey, how's my Red Canary implementation been?" And you can modify the kind of date range that you're looking at here. This is probably the slide that I would go to. Now, maybe you want to like drill down specifically more into just this bucket of threats. We do have a kind of at a glance slide that really just breaks down how many of the threats that were identified, were identified were high severity, how many were medium severity, how many were low severity. And there's some kind of takeaways here on the right in terms of like what were the kind of attack techniques that might have been featured in those threats. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can view your threats within the context of like a MITRE attack heat map a little later on. But so this slide is great for kind of uh, just a kind of volume drill down. It's color coded. It's quick at a glance if you want to put it into a doc, or if I want to put it into a doc. Another thing that Brian mentioned was looking at accuracy, coverage, and timeliness. And we have a slide. Red Canary has a really great slide that gives me a very quick and easy overview of how my Red Canary implementation is doing across all of those kind of vertices. So one being accuracy, it gives me a quick readout of how many of the threats that were published ended up being false positives. Similarly, for coverage, it tells me how many things slipped through that maybe we didn't catch. And then also it gives me an overview of kind of like what percentage of my overall threats that were detected within a 2-hour window. And this is a really quick at a glance view of all of those things that Brian mentioned that are important to kind of track to get an idea of how you're doing from a security posture perspective. Now, we also, Red Canary also has a slide that breaks out how many threats were identified by the specific security products that I leverage. So in here, you can see I have my Red Canary product, but I also have all of my Microsoft suite that I leverage as well. And I can see what the total number of threats identified per product were. And there is some overlap here. So some of these may have been identified in both spots, but a good way to identify, what threats might have been uniquely identified by Red Canary is this next slide here, where you can see these threats were detected only by Red Canary. These threats were detected only by products that I use that were not Red Canary, and these ones were detected by both. And this is a really good way of seeing, seeing, what does my coverage look like across my security products? It gives me a really good window into unique value that's being provided by Red Canary. But one thing I really like about this slide as well is that it's super transparent, right? If Red Canary is detecting less threats than the rest of my product suite, that will be updated here in real time. It's laid out for me. And also there is utility in even threats that are identified by products that were not Red Canary, because the Red Canary is still providing the value of confirming and investigating those threats, so that I don't have to myself. And I think that the transparency here is something that I really value as a Red Canary customer. Now, I did mention that we have a way to view the total number of threats that were identified and published by Red Canary for my particular implementation as it pertains to like the overall MITRE attack kind of threat matrix. So you can look at this matrix and it gets darker for the number of threats that pertain to that particular technique. So I'm sure that a lot of you have seen something similar to this in the past. And what I like about this is it gives it's like an interactive way to view, look at it looks like I have a lot of threats that end up using this particular technique. You can click into that technique, get a little bit more information about, what particular is happening here. And it goes even deeper than this because Red Canary also gives me a way of viewing which one of their detectors. So at Red Canary, a detector is kind of like a heuristic that we use to map onto a particular technique and programmatically identify it in a large data set. So we have all this incoming telemetry and alerts, and our detectors are really looking for patterns and signals within all of that data that might indicate that one or more of these techniques are being leveraged for something nefarious or suspicious. And inside each of these techniques, I can see a list of here's the are all of the individual Red Canary detectors that are kind of looking in one way or another for this particular technique. And I can go even deeper onto all of these detectors. So in here, I can look for detectors that have to do with Okta, for instance, and I can actually click on these and it will pop out a slide and it'll tell me about kind of like, what is kind of normal behavior with regards to this particular, the stuff that's featured in this detector and what's the kind of malicious stuff that this detector is looking for. And it maps it back to that attack technique. So all in all, I think Red Canary provides a really easy way for me to both contextualize my threats in the form of some of the security metrics that Brian had gone over, but also in the context of, programmatically, how are these things being identified, for me via kind of Red Canary's like bread and butter, which is human expertise and our powerful engine that is kind of multi-domain. So I think I am kind of coming towards the end here. So I'd love to answer any questions anybody has or pop back into any particular part of the slides or demo if people are curious.
And while we wait for folks to muster up the courage to ask any questions if they have any, the metric stuff that I was talking about on the front end of this webinar, where is the chat? There it is. I actually wrote a blog about that a few months ago. So if you want to take a bit more time with that, I'll share that blog with you all. So a little bit more detailed than what I went over here. But it does sort of talk through that framework for those sort of simple, relatively simple categories of measurements that security operations teams can use to sort of as a benchmark for success or improvement or the lack of improvement, as the case may be. So feel free to fire away with any questions that you might have. We'll give it, a few minutes to see if anyone pipes up. And then otherwise, we can let you guys go about your days. One other interesting thing to look at is, so I was thinking about this as you were going through the attack mapping slide. So like those are, I'm going to ask you a question that I hope you know the answer to. The heat map that you were looking at there was specific to grand scale industries, right?
Correct. Yeah, that is for any user that has a portal in Red Canary, it will be mapping specifically your threats onto that heat map. That's correct, Brian.
And then we also, right, every year we take a look at in aggregate, we take a look at like the MITRE attack techniques that we're seeing across all of our customers, and do a bunch of analysis and spend like basically a quarter to a half of the year writing up our threat detection report, which looks not only at the top techniques we're seeing, but the top threats, and also lays down some trends. So if you're interested in sort of comparing your most prevalent attack techniques to sort of the broader worlds, I guess you could say, across all Red Canary customers, you should check out the threat detection report. It does only touch on the top 10 techniques, just because anything more than that would be kind of unmanageable. But there is an archive there that shows sort of historically other techniques that have popped up in the top 10. All the techniques and threats like include analysis, detection coverage, where we even talk through like the very specific detectors that are catching these things most often for us. And if you're into it, we also have some guidance on sort of how you can do atomic red team testing to validate coverage against different techniques. Atomic red team is an open source library of tests that we help maintain that security teams use to test their detective controls against, a variety of MITRE attack techniques. So does not appear that we have any questions. Let me take a gander at the Q&A box. But if any questions come to mind after we close out of this webinar, I'm sure there's some sort of email. Does anyone from Red Canary here know of an email address that attendees, or can they respond, to the invite that they got sent for this webinar? All right. Webinars@redcanary.com. So if any questions occur to you after the fact, send them into webinars@redcanary.com, and either myself or Owen, or if the answer to the question eludes us, a more knowledgeable person will answer that question to you and reach back out.
Awesome.
I don't feel like we need to stick around here for the last 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes. So I want to again thank everybody for joining us today. I understand that you could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here with us, and we appreciate that. Also, thanks to Owen, and congratulations on your debut Red Canary webinar. I hope there's many more to come. Again, thanks, and we'll see you at a future webinar.
Thanks, everyone.